Let's get going. Every week, or every month rather, we do an Around the Blackboard called for this lovely blackboard that's behind us that contrasts very lovely with Brad's Captain Kirk sweater, as he calls it. So, so glad that you can join us, Theology on Tap friends, podcast listeners. Don't be afraid, by the way, to give us a nice review somewhere. That always helps. Apparently, that's important for algorithmic purposes. But I'm Evan Mclanahan. I'm the pastor at First Lutheran here in town. And let's just go down the line. Bradley Vardell.
Yes, I'm Bradley Varnell. I'm the canon for community life and young adult ministry at Christ Church Cathedral downtown.
Varnell with an N, not Vardell.
Yes.
I apologize for the misspelling in Facebook.
Great. Well,
he says great.
Most people do a Varnell or a Darnell. It's the V that normally throws people off.
Gotcha.
Evan likes to be different.
Yeah, I like that.
Trying.
I'm Sarah Stone. I'm Outreach Director for Young Adults at MDPC on the West Side. That makes it sound cool.
I'm near you, but I'm definitely not there.
As cool as I am, I know.
Meredith Mills, Senior Pastor of Westminster, creator of Gastro Church.
Yeah. Man,
And
it's like a legendary table.
Check us out, HoustonTOT.com. We have an event coming up February 7th, and it's one lesser, what is it called? Little Big Sins?
Little Big Sins.
Little Big Sins, exploring the lesser vices. So we'll be talking about smoking, drinking, and tattoos,
so much
naughtier
fun.
things.
Man, we went from heresy to sin.
I know. It's like kind of the natural
getting
trajectory,
better
isn't
and
it?
better. Let's do hell next.
Okay. Well, if you get a tattoo, you're going to hell. I think that's going to be the takeaway from the night.
I actually was telling
That's a joke.
someone who has a lot of tattoos about that next event.
Yeah.
And he said that years had gone by between his brother seeing him with the tattoos. And when his brother saw them with him, he said, "You're going to hell."
Wow, it's a real leap from something being sinful and you're going to hell.
Yeah. I was rather shocked at that because I'm like, I don't even think in Leviticus it says something like that.
If Evan's shocked by it,
I mean, you're just stoned. You're not going to hell.
just you're stoned. But when you die from the stoning, you go up.
I mean, actually, and arguably, hell is not really a concept in the Old Testament, but, you know.
That's
we should totally do hell for our next TOT.
Okay.
We've lost we could call it damn.
But that's
That'd
cute.
Be fun.
Uh-huh.
And it'd be tied in because it'd be like cursing, which we will also be talking about this upcoming one.
Damn it. TOT takes on hell.
Takes on. Like we're down there fighting off demons.
Well, let's
Okay.
talk about the great sin of our day, which is cultural appropriation.
Yes.
As we all know.
I thought it'd be fun to start today by just talking about some pop culture. We won't spend a ton of time on it, but for those of you that are watching, and just like that, which is the follow-up like 20 years later or something to Sex in the City.
Okay, why didn't they just call it that? Because I was like, what is this sin just like that crap?
You know what? Can you not be such a hater?
My hunch is, Evan, you're not the target demographic.
Actually, this article would say that you actually are the target demographic, and that's the problem.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah,
So in the most recent episode, which I did watch because I love some good trash TV, the main character, Carrie Bradshaw, is with her friend who's Indian, and they're in this Indian fashion, like high-end fashion shop, searching for an outfit for her friend to wear to Diwali, which is the Indian festival of like light winning out over darkness. And Carrie's had a rough year. And so she says how lovely that sounds. Her friend invites her and says, you should get an outfit. Of course, Carrie is a fashion icon. And so she is like lusting over these outfits in the shop. And she looks at her Indian friend and says, would that be okay? And I didn't even know what she meant. I thought she meant, am I inviting myself to the party? And the friend said, because I've invited you to my party to be my guest, it's not cultural appropriation, it's cultural appreciation. And so she wears this outfit. It turns out she actually wears a lehenga, not a sari, and they had said it was a sari shop. So some people were upset by that. And she also goes like really over the top. She wears this like mohawk of flowers, and it's very extra. But that's her character. Her character is always being extra and pushing the envelope in fashion. But it got written up in all these articles as being bad news bears because of this idea that the article that I chose from Vogue says, it isn't the sentiment that rubbed us the wrong way so much as the dialogue. Quote, it's not cultural appropriation, says Seema, that's the Indian character. It's cultural appreciation, end quote. Something about that phrasing doesn't sit right with us. And perhaps it's the fact that so often the characters of color on this show appear as tokens. It's what we were talking about beforehand. Later on it says, a white woman wearing a lehenga to an Indian festival is not appropriation, but putting a Pollyanna-esque bow on it by calling it appreciation came off as a little bit cringe. And I guess my question is, what would make it not cringy. Because when I watched this episode, what I thought of is that I, for a while, was hanging out with and dialoguing and engaging with some Muslim friends. And I continued to go to their iftar dinners, which is breaking the fast during Ramadan. And after a couple of years of going to these dinners, they bought me one of the traditional outfits, the tunic and pants with the sparkles all over. And I loved it. And it was beautiful. When they gave it to me, they were saying, you're invested in this community and we're invested in you. And so come and dress along with us for the celebration. And so I did. And to me, this was the same thing. So I guess I just don't see what the problem is. And it almost makes it so scary to even talk about such things, because if this doesn't even work, then what does? Like, when is it not appropriation or cringy?
Yeah. Well, so I'll give an example of a story. It happened a few years ago, but there was a couple of young ladies. They started a burrito stand in Portland, Oregon. Okay. Pretty liberal city. And they said, yeah, our tortillas are great because we went to Mexico and learned how to make them from like Mexican old women who make tortillas every day for the last 60 years, right? Well, no, that was cultural appropriation. Their business was destroyed. Like, the left came after them and they had no business. Like, once it came out that, hey, you can't go to Mexico and steal tortillas recipes from people. And I'm like, to me, it's just, it's insane. I mean, the name of their shop was Cooks, Kooks. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, like, talk about kooky, you know? I mean, like, you try to learn how to make the best tortilla and you have your business destroyed. At some point, like, we need to be like, you know, it's not, like, everything is not evil. Okay, it's not always cultural appropriation to, you know, enjoy another food. I think that...
Or even celebrate another culture.
I mean, I would agree. It sounds like it was very hand-fisted in this particular episode.
Everything in this show.
Okay,
so... Yeah.
You know, but, I mean, I don't know. I just don't get all that upset about it. I actually wonder if, like, say, for example, in this case, Indian people would get that upset about it either. I don't know.
I think the author of this article is Indian. Is she not?
Yeah. No, she's Indian. Yeah.
I mean, so my read of the article, I think everything can be crazy, right? Everything can be taken to a crazy extent. I do think there is a cultural appropriation. There is a legitimate thing to be concerned about when it happens. My read of this article, though, was less about what actually happened and more about the ham-fistedness of it. And to your point, Sarah, I think there's a difference between what happens personally and a script written for a show.
Yeah.
Right? Because what she said is, like, that dialogue doesn't even sound real. Like, who says that to their friends? Who says, like, it's not cultural appropriation, it's cultural appreciation?
Yeah.
Like, because it sounds like a billboard somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to her thing is, like, this is what tokenism is all about. It's not real dialogue, it's not real people, it's people spouting billboards.
Yeah.
And bumper stickers instead of actually talking to each other.
Yeah. And that's fair.
They're probably fending off the mob. I mean, they probably are basically like, okay, we got to address the elephant in the room. And
well, I was telling Meredith before that the show has, and we can get off of this and get on to something way more prescient, but the show has introduced all these new characters. They're all people of color or on the LGBT part of the LGBT community, and a lot of the conversations they're having are about, like, big things in culture right now. And I was telling Meredith said something like, well, why, I don't know, why do you think they're doing that or something? And I thought, because I think they can't not do it. If they're going to come back in 2022, I think they think to be, like, heard, someone has to have a daughter who's transitioning because she's trans, and someone has to be dealing with pronouns, and someone has, all these things have to be part of it, because otherwise they won't be relevant. I think it's very fear-based, which is why they have conversations that sound like billboards.
I mean, but there's a way to do all of that without writing dialogue that sounds like a bumper sticker.
That's fair. So we'll write our own show. I'll be Carrie. Let me stop. All right. We can move on, because
do I have a place in the show?
No, you're the person everyone
not
hates.
Your target demographic.
It's like real life.
To be fair. Cool. Yeah. Well, what's the next one is?
So the next one's about an icon. I love icons.
But not like a fashion icon.
Not a fashion icon, like a religious icon. I think they're great. So there's this icon. There's an iconographer named Kelly Lattimore who is fairly popular. I think a lot of people in my circles really love his work. He wrote an icon called Mama that was hanging at the Catholic University of America. Yeah. I have to speak directly into it. It was an icon called Mama that was at the Catholic University of America, and it was a depiction of the Virgin Mary cradling Christ. And both Mary and Christ in this in this icon are African American. And Lattimore also said, when prompted, that this is also an icon of George Floyd.
He's the one being cradled.
Yes, that this icon is simultaneously an icon of the Virgin Mary and Christ and the Virgin Mary and George Floyd. There's this kind of like blurring that's happening. And so it created a bit of a backlash at the university. Some folks like tipped off Heritage Foundation about it, and they kind of broke the story on it. It was blessed by a priest to be hung in their Mary Champion of Justice chapel, but it got stolen. Icon wound up getting stolen, which is generally a bad move to steal like blessed artwork from a chapel. But part of the larger conversation is past the theft and more like, what is the proper relationship between religious art and contemporary news stories? What is the appropriate level of portraying Christ in different ways to speak towards different events? And that's really the conversation that is swirled around it that I think is really interesting. I wish we had a picture.
I know. Maybe we can put a link in
and
the
you
show
can
notes.
Google. You can Google
Google
Lattimore Mama, and the image will come up. But I mean, I found it to be a really striking image. And Lattimore speaks a little bit about, this is an icon of Christ, but insofar as Christ identifies with the oppressed and the outcast, it is an icon of George Floyd, right? The part of what inspired the writing of this icon was George Floyd's death and the ensuing protest. And so it's not a neat and clean, this is Christ, or this is George Floyd. Rather, it's meant to evoke both.
Yeah.
Which I think is really powerful. It says something about Christ's identification with sinners and with sufferers. So I
Well, in the article that you brought us, it makes a comparison. The writer talks about St. Francis and how St. Francis really abhorred lepers. But then there's this moment where he's riding along and he sees a leper and he just feels drawn and hugs the leper and then turns back around and the leper's not there. Turns out it was Christ. And it's like the story in the Bible when Christ says, when you do these things for the least of these, you're doing it for me.
Yeah.
And that was convicting for me because my first, when I read the title and the first paragraph, I was like, we're deifying George Floyd. And so at first I was like, this is terrible. And then I was like, well, but there is this idea that Christ says when you're kind to the least of these, you're kind to me. So I have mixed thoughts on this, but I can hear you.
Well, so it's similar to Mother Teresa did a thing too, where she said this is Jesus of every person who was dying in her hospitals and orphanages. Like, it's always take extra care of this person because this is Jesus. And so there is this this idea that when we look that the passion was one time, and yet the passion is reflected in every time we see human suffer. Like, Christ is with the sufferer. Christ exists with the sufferer in a particularly powerful way. And so especially suffering that is perpetuated by human hands. Like, I think in the article, he said this person was lynched, right? So you think about this image of the lynched body. Like, theologically, we say like Christ was with those people in a particularly powerful way, and then this experience, in some way, the passion was something that happened once, and in some way, the passion is something that also is reflected in every experience of human suffering. And I think what he was trying to, what the artist, iconographer was trying to do was to say that in a powerful way for us today. I think, everything is political, right? So everything is political, and because our politics is a greater worldview for us than our faith, in many times people see this and they see it as a statement in favor of a particular political point of view, instead of seeing it as a declaration that all humans, and especially all Christians, should consider what it means like to experience, to what am I trying to say? Not experience Christ through this, like love the sufferer because the sufferer is reflecting Christ. That's not quite it, but something about like seeing the sacredness of Christ's presence within the experience of those who are suffering. Something along that, which should be something that we can do that crosses political lines.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
Well, I think let's talk about the St. Francis, analogy though. I think the question is then in this example are sort of Christ and the leper and George Floyd on equal footing. The leper is a victim of circumstance. Christ was the savior of the world. George Floyd was neither. Now, did he deserve to die in the way that he did? No. Okay, no one is arguing that. But there are certain facts that I don't think it's political to point out that make him very different from a leper, or Christ, certainly from Christ, as we all are. And I'm just going to be politically incorrect, and I might make you all mad. But
that's why we invited you.
Okay, but he refused to go into a police car. Okay, he absolutely refused and fought off 3 police officers to go into an air-conditioned police car. He had 3 times the amount of fentanyl, lethal to a person in his system. He was drug-addled, and he had committed a very serious crime. And that wasn't the first time. Am I justifying his death? Of course not. And I hate that I even have to keep saying that, because if we're going to have an adult conversation, we need to assess things on the face of them. So I'm not justifying. I'm not saying Derek Chauvin's a great guy and what he did was fine. What I'm saying though is if you're going to write that icon, thank you for saying writing, by the way, not painting. If you're going to write that icon and you're going to put that face in the place of Christ, and that's the kind of what we're going to end up saying is that, well, yes, but when we serve the least of these, we're serving Christ. Then I can imagine why some deeply religious people would be offended that you're placing that face in the place of Christ, because George Floyd is not above reproach. And I think a leper is closer to that reality. Now, we could say, well, situation around George Floyd's life kind of led him to this, and da-da-da-da-da, and that's fine.
Maybe the question is, should anybody be in that place?
Well, I would say no.
The Virgin Mary holding what's very clearly like her son.
None of us are above reproach, though.
Right, that's my point.
But I think it also matters, though, that like the same, when you visit the prisoners, you visit Christ, right? That's also in this verse in Matthew. And there's no caveat for like, oh, these are prisoners who are unjustly imprisoned.
Oh, true.
They're prisoners.
Yeah.
I'm just warning you, everything's gonna be lost unless you.
Yeah.
Unless you.
Okay.
Yeah. Because what you're saying is good. So keep going.
No, when you visit the prisoners, you visit Christ, and there's no caveat about why they're in prison. And I think, even if all this is true, that George Floyd had a criminal background or, all this stuff, I think one thing people need to be invited to do is to see in the midst of criminals, those who struggle with addiction, that Christ is also there. And I think, I think that can be an invitation that Christ isn't kind of like, I'm with the appropriate safe victim.
Innocent,
I'm with the safe prisoner.
Sure.
I'm with, there is this absolute identification with those who are oppressed and in prison. And I think that is the invitation for us, is to realize that there are plenty of people who, seeing Christ on the cross, I think would have had a very similar reaction, like, well, he was found guilty.
Yeah.
Well, mean, you just followed the rules, And I think, I don't know, I think that's the invitation for this icon, that, maybe we need to stop imagining that we would witness the cross and witness Christ on the cross and have we would react differently than the disciples. We'd still be there.
Yeah, and I would have been a Christ killer.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a rule follower, and he was breaking the rules. I get that. Have you ever seen the movie Dead Man Walking?
No.
Yes.
Okay, so what was the role of Christ with that prisoner? I mean, not to give away the whole thing, but there's this whole thing of where he's declaring his innocence, and this nun in Angola prison is helping him, and she's fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting to prove that he's innocent. I'm gonna have to give it away, but he's not. But he's not. And so then, what is the fight? The fight is to call on him to repent, so that he doesn't die forever for the lie that he committed and the crime, the murder, or whatever that he committed. So it's like, well, yes, Christ is there in the prison too, but like in what role? Is he offering forgiveness for the repentant sinner, or is he offering, or is the call to repent and trust in Christ? If you're a hardened rebel against God and you haven't given up the fight yet.
Well, I mean, sure, but most of this is going out to people who are not in prison, right? So like the call, and also we all need to repent, right? So like how many of us are reproached? Like all of us. But I think it is far easier to be derisive and judgmental of other people's crimes and other people's sins. And I think part of what this icon would be doing would be calling the attention of those who could easily walk away because they have different sins, right? They have different struggles. I hear what you're saying, which is that there's a temptation to ignore evil, right? There's a temptation to ignore.
Well, I think there's a temptation to. He was a person caught up at a cultural moment. I mean,
right.
And,
and there are a lot of other stories that have not been told.
Yeah.
But,
I'm not saying he wasn't a victim. Or I'm not saying that the sentence that Chauvin got was wrong and all of that. But by the way, Derek Chauvin was charged. Yeah. He is going to probably spend the rest of his life in prison. So it's not as though it were a complete injustice, right? In the sense that, say, Rodney King or some of these other examples where police sort of get away with it or whatever. But I just think if one makes this intentional choice, okay, of identifying Christ with all people on the down and out, I think there's a noble sentiment there. I don't totally disagree with it. I think the St. Francis leper analogy is a better one, because I think the leper is a victim of sort of the fallenness of sin. But if you're going to make that choice with a controversial figure, then she had to know that there was going to be backlash and that you would offend the sensibilities of some people who don't want Christ identified with people who may or may not have been, seeking whatever, to live a good life or whatever.
I don't think he was shocked, though. I don't think he was shocked at it.
I'm sorry, the artist it's a she.
Yeah, Kelly's he.
Oh, I'm sorry. Apologies. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think he was shocked. I mean, I think he kind of knew.
Yeah.
This is going to produce a reaction.
Yeah.
That was part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
The real question is, if you steal art that's been blessed,
you go to hell.
Your house?
You go to hell.
You get,
it definitely isn't.
Instant hell.
Contraindicated, I feel like, either way.
Yeah.
Satanists steal blessed hosts for black masses.
It's really.
You didn't know that? That's part of a black mass. Black mass is the opposite of a mass.
How do you know things like that? Who knows that? Who knows that?
Yeah,
that's
common knowledge.
Like right after I moved to Houston, there was some bar in town that was hosting a black mass.
Oh.
When I hear black mass, I think it's going to be African American.
No.
You're saying like the
dark
arts.
No, I'm talking about satanic.
Satan. Oh gosh.
No.
No, that's actually quite serious because
Sarah shows up.
The Roman Catholic Church they lock up. Yeah, they have a tabernacle for that reason. That's what the tabernacle. I mean, there's multiple reasons for a tabernacle, but one is to put in extra, if you will, a blessed communion host, so that people can go and have devotion. So, like the red candle that's in most Protestant churches, the candle of presence, that is a Roman Catholic thing to let people know that there is blessed bread in the tabernacle. Right. So, if you want to go be in the presence of Christ, because Christ is the bread is Christ, the body of Christ. So then you are in the presence of Christ, and the candle is an indication. Then Protestants take that and they're like, oh, well, God is everywhere. So if it's a sanctuary, so let's just have the candle lit all the time, And by the way, there's some real technology of those candles lasting as long as they do. I'm like, dude, is that a thing ever burn out? But anyway.
We didn't get that memo. We do not have. We didn't get any of these memos. I don't know. Black masses.
Do y'all have the red candle?
Yeah.
The candle of presence?
No.
You don't have that?
Mm-hmm.
We also serve
high church on this end.
We also serve Hawaiian bread and Welch's grape juice. So
you serve grape juice?
Yeah.
That's so
Welch was Methodist.
Sugar
I know.
Overload. I hope you
Welch was Methodist.
Have a keto version.
No, we've actually
you have
sorry.
to now.
That's gonna take us off on a tangent. But that was a thing. People wanted to gluten free, but then they wanted separate gluten free, and I was like, y'all, one bread, one body. I'm not going that far. So then we had to have gluten free for everyone, and y'all, gluten free sucks.
You heard it here first, Theology on there.
But it is interesting. I think that priests do have to protect, like the host, because people will steal them and use them for That might even be why in some practices they put it on the tongue. You know, they'll.
So no one can come swipe it right before you're about to take
I mean,
it.
I don't know if this was a Black Mass related thing, but I did the Camino last year, and so we were at this cathedral in Santiago, and they were doing communion at the.
Where did you
cathedral
start from?
In Pamplona.
Nice.
Wait, this is the walk.
Camino to
Spain,
Santiago,
Spain,
yeah.
Oh wow.
So we were in there, and you know they were doing mass and all that, and they gave very strict instructions when you go for communion. You receive the bread, and you had to consume it in front of the priest. And it was interesting watching it because people would take it and go off, and like the priest would just stare at them and like lock dagger eyes. It was fascinating. I don't know if they have a big.
I bet you there's a connection there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
Didn't know any of
Who wants to
this.
talk about vaccines?
Me.
That's my awesome segue.
This was in the Washington Post opinion piece from December 30th, so a few weeks now. Most evangelical objections to vaccines have nothing to do with Christianity. So, obviously there's a vaccine out there. I don't know if y'all have heard of it. It's the Coven Vaccine, and it's a kind of a new mRNA technology. In some respects, it's new. In some respects, it's been around for a few decades, maybe. But and obviously, you have a lot of people who don't, for whatever reason, don't want to take the vaccine, and so they're finding themselves trying to give reasons for not wanting to take the vaccine. And the issue for someone who's like a committed Christian who doesn't want to take the vaccine is that it is a little bit, you have to kind of build a case for it, right? Like you kind of have to say, well, there's a kind of theology of the body, or there's like, body's a temple and it's experimental technology, and, maybe the aborted fetal cell lines, people kind of go that route. People try to go these different routes. But the fact is, like, it's hard to just say, here's this one Bible verse that absolutely says I cannot take this vaccine. And so Christians are kind of coming up with kind of a variety of different arguments. And so this argument, this opinion in the Washington Post, written by Michael Gerson, is that, well, they don't have anything to do with Christianity. And so let me just read a little bit of it. As the United States ends the year with the highest levels of new infections in the COVID pandemic, the historical question naturally arises, were a hefty portion of Americans entirely out of their senses? Some of the rapid spread has come from breakthrough infections. Actually, a lot of it has, and that kind of is the point. But anyway, caused by insidiously transmissible Omicron variant. But after a ghastly year of rumor, alarm, and needless death, nothing is going to erase the harsh verdict against Americans in 2021. They were granted a miracle drug, and tens of millions refused to take it or take enough of it. So what are some of the reasons they give? Well, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In the New Testament, the Golden Rule is the moral culmination of the Sermon on the Mount. And it's clear from the text that Jesus is not encouraging calculating ethic of reciprocity. His goal is to inspire a kind of aggressive, preemptive generosity, right? If anyone would sue you, to then take your tunic and give them your cloak as well. And he goes on to offer a few different. White evangelical Christians have resisted getting the vaccine at a higher rate. Is that even true?
Because
I'll assume it's true, but I don't know.
Okay, go ahead. Keep going.
And so he talks about the aborted cell line. He says, well, actually, this a lot of things came from those old fetal cell lines, and that's probably not a good argument, and so on and so forth. And so I would say that's probably not a very good argument. More than that, the sanctification of anti-government populism is displacing or dethroning one of the most basic Christian distinctions. Most evangelical posturing on COVID mandates is really syncretism, a merging of unrelated beliefs, in this case, the substitution of libertarianism for Christian ethics. Well, I just disagree with that, but I also disagree with the mantra that it's kind of about 2 weeks old, and frankly, the narrative is changing right before our very eyes. But the mantra that, well, here comes Omicron, it's because people are getting vaccinated, right? No, that's just not true. People who are vaccinated are also getting coronavirus, and you now start to hear, like Fauci said the other day, oh, there's a lot of kids in the hospital with COVID, but not from COVID. Oh, that's an interesting distinction. Would have been helpful to make that 2 years ago. And Rachel Walensky said just this weekend, I think yesterday, that, 75% of people who died from COVID had 4 comorbidities. That's interesting information. You told me 800,000 people died from COVID. Would have been nice to know. Those distinctions matter. And that's what people have been saying. That's what Christians have been saying. And they have been saying, I don't want to take this technique. I don't want to take this particular vaccine. I don't want to put it in my body. It's different from traditional vaccines. In fact, it's not a vaccine, arguably. And so I think I have the right to bodily autonomy, and I have the right to say no to what I put in my body. I mean, isn't that a very fundamental right? And so what has happened, though, is that what these particular American citizens are told is every excuse you give is not good enough. So then they retreat to the last bastion of basically the First Amendment. Like they're going to like Nuremberg codes, right? They're like I've got nothing left. I'm just please respect my conscience.
Yeah.
Like you don't like my scientific arguments, even though they're obviously quite good, which is what they're now admitting. You don't like any of the reasons I'm giving it. So just please listen to my conscience. That's all Christians have left in many of these cases.
See, I actually agree with the title of this article in so much as, so it says that the objections have nothing to do with Christianity. I think so many Christians have been forced into this religious exemption because it's like, hey, I just don't want to. And I have various reasons. In fact, I don't know about you guys, but I actually got asked to write a letter for religious exemption. And it had nothing in it about like Bible verses or anything like that. It was like, this person is, actively involved in their faith and they're really seeking to do the right thing. And this is a matter of conscience. And so it's almost like it's just a thing we're grabbing. If I were going to do, I'm vaccinated, but if I wasn't going to, and I think people should have the right not to, I might grab on that too, even though it's not really religious. I mean, and by the way, the golden rule thing that he says here is just a straw man. He says, so he's talking about the grab bag of religious exemptions, blah, blah, blah. Then he goes, the default ethical stance of Christianity is the golden rule. So I'm like, if you were to ask the four of us, what do you think like the baseline idea of Christianity is? You might get slightly different versions, but they're all going to involve Jesus. They're not going to be, it's basically the golden rule. Yeah. That's not the sort of, anyway, but it's fine. The whole thing is full of straw men. And it bothers me that people are having to claim religious exemptions when they should be able to say, even if it's crazy sauce. And I don't think it is, but even if it is,
I have a right not to. I have a right not to. And we did that with every other vaccine. Like kids can go to public school that aren't vaccinated. By the way, there's going to be a whole lot more of them in the coming years. There's going to be a whole lot more people saying, you know what, I'm going to rethink that whole measles vaccine. I'm going to be rethinking, and that's for those pushing the COVID vaccine, okay, like they're actually damaging the credibility of all vaccines when they push it this hard. But so why is it what is so different about this vaccine? And so then you look at what Australia is doing and what Austria is doing and what Germany's doing. It's like, gosh, this is starting to feel like just a tool that you can use to decline my ability to fully participate in science. I'm starting to feel othered. I'm starting to feel discriminated against. I'm starting to feel ostracized because I don't have this magical shot that I don't need because COVID is of no danger to me. Yeah. Because 75% of the people who died had 4 comorbidities. So it's like, can we be reasonable about this? Well, I think so. So it's like, on the one hand, you're right. Most evangelicals can't directly appeal to Christianity. They have to appeal to broader principles of, bodily autonomy and a right of conscience and prudence. I argued this one around the Blackboard like 6 months ago. I said, I think Christians can refuse the vaccine just on the grounds of prudence. We don't know. We don't know long-term effects of this. You can't know, and I'll be highly critical of President Trump on this. Do you know why it takes 5 years to develop a drug? It isn't because the chemicals take that long to figure out. It's because it takes that long to test it. So Operation Warp Speed, which might have been, I don't know, might have in some way is defensible, but someone like me would say, dude, you short-tracked an important process. We have no idea how people, for example, with organ replacements, like my mother-in-law, she's on anti-rejection medication because she has a kidney, Did they do a bunch of tests on people with, on those particular drugs? Of course not. We have no clue how the vaccine interacts with virtually any other drugs because they've done no testing on it. And even the testing they have done is now that when people are starting to look in the footnotes of the Pfizer, it's starting to look pretty shady. 95%,
What do you guys think about all this?
Sorry, talk too much.
I think I agree with the title. For sure. I think most of the objections people give for religious reasons are just pulled out of thin air. And I think using religious reasons, I'm going to learn to speak into this one day.
Then you're a rapper.
Yeah.
No.
I think most of the reasons I have heard people give for religious exemptions are just ridiculous. And I agree with him that this kind of identification of a kind of libertarianism with Christian ethics, I do think has taken root in a lot of Christianity. I think you see it in progressive ways. I think you see it in very conservative ways. But it does seem the Christian argument, or the argument made by Christians of like, I don't want it, my right. I don't know that I can totally get on board that is a Christian way of thinking about the vaccine. Beyond questions of should you be forced to get it, should you not? But like, I don't know that is the correct posture for Christians to have of, I don't want it, doesn't work for me, bye y'all. Because so much of the arguments being made around why vaccination is important isn't because all of us are going to drop dead if we get COVID, but it's because I'm a relatively healthy person. I can get COVID and probably survive. But I also work in a church with a lot of people who are older, who are immunocompromised. Me getting the vaccine can reduce my chance of infecting people who are at risk. And that is the argument I want people to engage with.
So,
right? What is our duty towards, okay, how do, and there's limits, right? Because you can say, well, don't drive at all, because you could put yourself, I mean, I think we have to have a conversation about risk reduction, not elimination of COVID, not avoidance of sickness at all. But it seems like that is the place for Christians to start with. What do I owe my neighbor? Sure. What does it mean to love? And I'm not sure starting with I don't want it, I'm autonomous.
No, I agree.
Is
so then I would say, does the vaccine prevent one from getting it and spreading it? And if the answer to that is no, then I think that's a harder argument to make, like for the benefit of my neighbor.
But it does. But it greatly reduces your chance of getting it and being hospitalized seriously. Against the Delta variant, it was very successful in preventing infection. There's always breakthrough infections with vaccines. That's not new. And part of the problem is that we have not had equitable distribution of vaccines. So you get Omicron variants like in South Africa because Western, very wealthy nations have often been hoarding tons of vaccine doses. So I don't think it's not that, the rest of the world is just awash in vaccinations, and yet these variants are popping up. Questions of vaccine availability also affect that. So I don't think it's quite I don't think it's quite as simple as like, oh my gosh, look at this, like, look at what they're getting.
Yeah.
Right now we're getting all these variants despite widespread vaccination.
Yeah.
Like,
so I had COVID and I'm not vaccinated, right? So I have natural immunity. So that should help someone, right?
Yeah, it should.
But it won't help you get into the Smithsonian in DC.
Right.
My sister that lives up there was saying they're requiring people to show proof of vaccination, even children, to go into the museum.
So here's what's interesting. What natural immunity for every other disease in the history of man was considered a gold standard, right? And that was we never would have thought about vaccinating people who had natural immunity. Why don't people like Fauci why don't they talk about it?
Because it's a different virus. So other countries do take it into consideration, but it increases the complication because it's a coronavirus. You're not immune forever, right? It's like you get the cold every year, you get the flu every year.
Exactly.
I've gotten COVID twice. Yeah, I might have gotten it more, except for I didn't know. I'm sorry. I'm protected.
It was a long time ago.
It was a while ago. And one of them might have actually been a false positive, but I had to quarantine anyway. So the thing about the natural infection is it increases so much of the messaging. It just they're going for simple, and it's easier to say put a shot in your arm than to try to do the math of how long has it been since you had it. How was it a real or was it a false positive? Like all this other stuff. And really, like you're probably by the time this is all over, we're gonna all get it or get vaccinated multiple times, and it's gonna be something that you get every couple of years, like the flu. Like you get the flu. Yeah. I will say so I've been kind of saving my response until the end because my response actually goes really well with the next article we're talking about. This was a terrible article, right? Like, so whatever you think about this topic, it was a terrible article. It was a person who obviously doesn't know Christianity very well. Yeah. And more to the point, it's a person who has never seriously engaged with any of the arguments on the other side. So what he's done is he's read a headline, or he's probably scrolled down his parents' Facebook page, or he's done something like Googled something and seen a headline. He's been like, I know what's wrong with that. And he's gone and written, or he's listened to Fox News for 5 minutes, or he's done something like that.
It's caricature.
Not even Fox News. They're super pro-vaccine.
Okay. Because he has never actually engaged with the other side, he has no idea what their arguments are. And so he's written this so here's a pro tip for you. If your belief of the other argument is that I'm selfish, I'm evil, or I'm lazy, and that's why I want to do this, chances are you're wrong,
Yeah.
right? Nobody out there is actually arguing that. And the thing is, I hear that in both the right and the left.
Yeah.
Like, this is why they want to do that. And it comes down to you're stupid, you're selfish, you're lazy. So just don't be those things and you'll be like me. And the fact that this is in the Washington Post means that everyone does it.
Yeah.
Means that nobody actually I actually read a fantastic article that was put out it was like a 6-part article really engaging the anti-vaccine. And it was from a pro-vaccine standpoint. But it was, first of all, it took like 35 minutes to read. It was really long, but it was great.
Yeah.
And I was like, and it got all this flack because it was giving air to misinformation. And I was like, or engaging with the questions that people have, right? And the more that we don't actually engage with what people are saying, the more we're going to put out stuff like this, which is going to make your side feel more holy.
Yeah.
That's what it does. Like, people who agree with this guy are going to think he's great.
Yeah.
And people who don't
And
are
they're going to think that the crux of Christianity is.
And by the way,
golden rule.
evangelical is probably a proxy for Trump voter.
Yeah.
Probably.
I think so.
In this
In the
article, at
Washington
least.
Post.
I think so.
Yeah. And by the way, Sotomayor said some totally fallacious things.
I know.
Total misinformation. I don't know if she's been kicked off the Supreme Court yet or what.
Stop. She hasn't been kicked off. But she did. Michelle Walensky, is that the name?
Yeah. Michelle Walensky.
Came back and was like, that's not correct.
Well,
Anyway.
but also, this is just a fact. I mean, if you scroll through someone who's been canceled on Twitter, I mean, today's misinformation is tomorrow's fact. Okay?
Oh, no, absolutely.
Today's conspiracy theory in 3 months is proven to be
Although
true.
not all of them.
Always.
Not all of them.
Not all of it, but a lot of
The
there have been
Jewish
a lot of
space
things.
lasers are still not proven.
Not proven.
Jury's
The-
out on that one.
The Rockefellers'
proven.
absolute control over all things. Yeah, I'm with you there.
But would we all at least agree that, because we have different stances on the vaccine across the table, but that there should be freedom to choose? Would we agree about that? Choose to get it or not get it?
So I would agree.
Aside from the religious thing. Like,
in
that's,
this particular case, I would agree with that, but I'm not even sure that I would agree that every vaccine ever should be voluntary, right? I can see a situation in which the survival of humanity depends upon everyone getting.
yeah, I mean,
the drug.
I can't speak to that because I don't know if you don't have the polio vaccine, but I do, you're not, if I'm not going to get it, then I'm like, every man for himself.
And
Don't be stupid,
And by the
you
way,
know?
the vaccine is not FDA approved. Okay, that vaccine is not available to us. Comirnaty. That vaccine is not available. So it is still emergency use authorization. That is a direct violation of the Nuremberg Code to put experimental medicine in your body. It is, as say Dr. Malone, for example, said on Joe Rogan's show, explicitly illegal. It is explicitly illegal.
Okay, so Evan, my question for you, is your problem this vaccine, or hypothetically, if there were a vaccine with a 90% mortality rate?
A vaccine with a 90.
Sorry.
Okay, I was
That
like,
was wrong.
don't take that, listeners.
Don't take that
Gentle reader.
If there were a sickness with a 90% mortality rate, would you agree with that being mandatory?
Yeah. Well, I think so.
Because you still get a 10% chance of survival.
I think so. I mean, I agree. There's some ethical, there's some ethical things to figure out, and in ethics, it's not always a clear black and white answer. But what I will say is that I find it interesting that people who used to be really critical of big pharma, who are making trillions of dollars off of this, a huge exchange of wealth and this whole thing. I mean, talk about the rich getting richer.
Yeah.
I mean, and by the way, no liability. No liability. They're in no danger of anything. I mean, don't you think that the pharmaceutical companies should be responsible if they're creating a product that hasn't been properly tested, that's been fast-tracked? And for what? Again, I think that if the data comes out in this, I mean, for example, Italy reframed the number of people who died from COVID. It's about 5 to 10% of what their death number was before. Okay. So because they said, okay, these are people that probably were going to die quickly anyway, and COVID finished it off. That's what we used to say about pneumonia. So I'm highly skeptical. So it's hard to say about another super deadly disease or whatever, because the fact is, this disease, I don't know that it's particularly deadly.
Well, that was her point.
Yeah. So I'm highly
hypothetical.
skeptical of the entire project. And
Jump in if you want
So,
to
yeah.
get your.
I think it's misleading to say like it was driven through Like, all due respect, like, why should I trust your read of like the scientific process, the FDA, instead of like versus the apparatus? Right. And I think you can be critical.
Oh, you shouldn't trust me. You should.
I think the idea that like, I think just like dropping that in there is misleading and not helpful, because I think you can rightly criticize very much how this has been marketed and branded in a way that has completely ignored just the fact that people are afraid. And it's like, wait, why did this take so? I mean, I think there are rational answers to it. That, you know, a lot of it has to do with funding and how we fund research in the United States. You can give voice to people's real fears and concerns. You can also talk about how it is kind of silly that we were mandating children show proof of vaccination to get into the Smithsonian, or there have been churches who institute these vaccines, which, I mean, I think those are real questions around like, okay, y'all, are we getting out of step? I think you can acknowledge the ways it's gone off kilter, and also respect that like this isn't like a cover up or something that's been
like
that's
nefarious.
been rammed through.
Yeah.
Like I think that, and there are a lot of experimental treatments and drugs out there that the FDA does approve, right? There are tons of experimental treatments for cancers, or all sorts of things. And I mean,
and I think in many cases it's kind of one of those things like, if you're going to die anyway, give me the experimental stuff. But I mean, by definition, you can't have had long-term studies on a drug that's only been around for 2 years. By definition.
Sure.
So that's why I'm saying I'm not saying it's nefarious. I'm saying, as a matter of fact, we don't know what the long-term effects of this might be. We actually don't know whether or not being vaccinated could make you more susceptible to future strains of COVID later, which seems to be happening with Omicron.
But there's also a basic question of the vaccines induce a biological response. Right. So I think the question you have to answer is, okay, if they're just triggering my body to respond like my body should respond, what is your concern?
Well, it does that.
Like, it's not a separate pill that's like altering brain chemistry or something.
Well, it creates thousands or trillions of spike protein in your body, and in fact, the spike protein is the part of COVID that's actually really harmful. And so
harmful because it will get into. That's how it gets into your cells and infects you.
Yeah, causes clotting.
But if the spike protein is not connected to the virus, what is it infecting you with?
I don't know that I could answer that question. But I would say that
you can get a doctor on the show.
But doesn't there? It seems to me that there are lots of examples of a blood clotting, stroke. I mean, if you look, for example, at all-cause mortality, which is the most important number, that number's up everywhere there's a heavy vaccination project, and it's not from COVID.
Vaccination project, or just vaccination?
No, COVID in the last year.
Yeah.
If you look year over year, like, I mean, y'all probably don't read Alex Berenson's Substack. I do, and Dr. Malone's and Steve Kirsch's. But, you know, every single day there's a new study that says, gosh, you know, like in Germany, there's 20% higher overall death rate this year than last year. And it's not from COVID. Isn't that weird?
I will say my autoimmune thing spiked right after I got the vaccine. It sucked. I'm still here, though. So, but I do think we should probably move on to the next article, because we're never going to agree on that. But it was an interesting conversation. Meredith, you want to tell us about the next one?
All right, it's time for war.
It's time for war.
So mine was from NPR, and actually it was a fair article. I was interested to see what they were going to say. Imagine another civil war, but this time in every state. And what this article was saying was that this has been super trendy now, saying like, "Ooh, it's time for another American Civil War," and it's happening on both sides, and it's happening saying we're at the very last stage before we resort to other measures. And so they have quotes from like both sides saying that, like, we're already in a cold civil war, we're about to go for a real civil war.
I didn't realize it was that bad yet.
And then escalating it above even like, here are the number of guns that American citizens own, like, get ready to defend yourself. And so to the article's defense, it doesn't put the blame either on one side or the other, which is what both sides do. Both sides are like, we're just defending ourselves against like the other side.
The other crazies,
Part of the reason I picked this article is that I spent a whole lot of time trying to listen to lots of different voices. I used to say the other side, but now I've just gotten confused about which side I'm on. So like, I spent a whole lot of time trying to listen to a whole lot of different voices. And so because of that, I hear what I feel are the best sides of the argument on multiple sides. The difficulty is both sides are because of the internet age, both sides, or every side, because there are so many sides, are so anxious to keep people's attention that they think the only way they can do it is to turn up the temperature. And because if you create emergency, then you have the temperature, then you have their attention. And then you can't let the emergency go because you lose their attention. And what this article is saying is fundamentally maybe there's a cost to that. Because if you speak it, it might come true. Right?
Yeah.
Like you keep calling for civil war, like some crazy crap might happen. And the thing is and what it says is like it wouldn't be a civil war like the North and the South because that's not where our divisions are. Our divisions are between our households. Our divisions are like it's literally would be like Houston versus Nacogdoches, right? Like it's
but not Houston versus Houston. I mean, in this room we disagree on things, you know.
Yeah, but geographically, urban, rural.
Sure.
It's within the body of the United States itself. Like, sure, you could have some like states going one way or the other, but even within California, like the valley versus the cities, like those are very, very different. Even within Virginia, my sister lives in Virginia, and you've got the DC area of Virginia, and then you've got like Virginia,
yeah,
and they don't vote the same,
No.
and they don't believe the same. And the thing is, I feel so if there is a civil war, it's going to be like this messy.
Where are the lines?
Where are the lines? There are no lines.
Do I have to be a farmer in this scenario?
There are no lines. But the thing is, like, if the only response is we have to win, then we're never going to win.
Right.
Like, if that's...
And both sides talk about saving the country, saving democracy.
Yeah.
So
that is rampant. Yeah. It's rampant. In fact, if you pull out quotes and you erase the name, like you can't tell who's who. And that kind of language and that kind of refusal, like the other article, refusal to actually engage with the arguments of the other side. Like, so it might not provoke a civil war because none of us can figure out how to do it.
Just the logistics were too hard, guys. Like,
but it's going to drive us to... It's going to drive us to not only greater division, but probably greater actual violence.
Yeah, hatred.
That breaks out. Which is honestly, I picked this one partly because this is like a personal thing of mine, is I spend a whole lot of time listening to very different sides. But I also kind of feel like this is what Theology on Top is trying to do for like the church version of this. Luckily, church people are less vocal about wanting to kill each other. Like
That's fair.
Doesn't quite get to that level.
I remember the Bush-Kerry election, though, and when that was over, I mean, that was the Iraq War was hot and heavy at that time. I mean, people thought they started throwing around like national divorce then, too. So I think some of that's been around. I do think there's a far better divide. I think like Charles Murray and the Bell Curve, it's a controversial book, but, he talks about this. I think it's sort of an elite versus ordinary America. And there has definitely been a huge growth in, the DCs of the world, the New Yorks of the world, the Los Angeles, huge wealth increase, education increase, opportunity increase. Whereas, blue collar Americans, their wages have gone down for 30 years.
Yeah.
That's why they voted for Trump, because he championed blue collar workers. He championed manufacturing in America. Let's not let the global industrialists ship all of our manufacturing jobs overseas to China because they might make 1 penny more per quarter on their stock price. He actually championed, the sort of average person that I think in many ways the church should be speaking for. But that said, I do think there are other creative solutions before Civil War.
yeah.
I'm glad we
Praise be.
But have you heard of Greater Idaho, for example?
I don't know.
Okay, Greater
It's
Idaho.
like Chop Chaz. What's happening?
Yeah, Greater Idaho is an effort to essentially incorporate 15 counties from eastern Washington state into Idaho. And so it
Why?
redraw because
They
rural
want the state rules from
Washington,
the other state.
rural Washington has nothing in common with Seattle. It's the same rural elite divide or elite blue collar divide. And so it's all over the country, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you see it everywhere. You see it in Houston and Nacogdoches, right?
Yeah.
And
And Nacogdoches is a university town, so it's actually probably not a good example.
Yeah,
if anyone's
but
out there
right.
listening from
Lufkin,
Nacogdoches,
something.
Lufkin, that's us.
yeah.
Die ball.
So, but I don't know. I think that I don't think it's going to get there. I actually think that if somebody could communicate a kind of vision for America that doesn't include saving our country and saving democracy, I think actually most Americans agree on a lot. And I actually don't. I mean, like, what would be the thing? What would be the one issue we'd fight about? I mean, abortion is the most contentious moral issue. It's the most equivalent to slavery. I don't see us fighting a civil war over that. Do you?
Mm-mm.
I just can't imagine it.
I see us fighting a civil war over the role of government leadership through pandemics.
Yeah, well, like the vaccine thing. That's what a lot of this conversation has been about.
Vaccines. How much
How much reach does the government have?
reach does government have?
No, I actually I do. I agree, but I think that'll die because. So my pithy statement is that I think the vaccine's going to fail before the power behind the governmental control behind using the vaccine will be able to take effect. So I take some joy in that.
I like your optimism.
Yeah.
I just don't know how to put this in my Evan box. He's not always the most optimistic.
I mean, literally today and yesterday, you're seeing the big ups at the CDC. You're seeing Fauci. They're starting to make small concessions. They're starting to say, even Biden said, hey, there's no national solution. Really? That's what you ran on. You said this idiot can't be elected. He can't be trusted to cure COVID. I'm not going to shut down the country. I'm going to shut down COVID. And now he's telling all these governors, hey, yeah, we don't have a solution. You're going to have to figure it out, states.
I thought Kenneth Copeland already took care of it.
Republican governors, though.
Yeah.
Which I think is important. To the Greg Abbotts who've been like, we're good. We're done, y'all. He's saying we can't.
Fair enough.
Y'all have to do something.
But I think it's going to be obvious that COVID is. I think they're pivoting. They're now starting to say, well, COVID is here to stay. Like we're not no one's making any grandiose promises about it anymore.
Well, yeah, but that was the last stage of the pandemic. Like the pandemic shift to endemic was the entire goal, right?
Yeah.
So like when it becomes something that has the same level of hospitalization as cold, then then it like affects a lot of people, and we get it, and we're fine. And Omicron sped that party up.
Yeah.
That's what. But again, 2 years ago, people were saying this is what's going to happen. Okay, this is how viruses survive. Right. Okay, they get weaker, but they get more transmissible. And so that's a good thing. That is how you get to natural immunity. That is how we've always understood viruses and fought them. So why does Novak, just to give an example, why does one of the greatest tennis players in the greatest tennis player in the world goes to play in the Australian Open and they imprison him? Yep. They take his phone away. They take his passport away. He can't play in the tournament. Forget that.
And he's had COVID, right? That's the story.
Yeah, he had COVID a month ago. And he got permission to show up, and then they take his visa away. I mean, this is insane. That is total insanity. It is total insanity.
But also, especially early on, people do die of COVID. Yeah. And even if they have comorbidities, I think we should be engaged in it's probably sad.
But people die of all kinds of things.
Oh, of course.
Sure, but I would hope we take measures not to speed that along.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. Absolutely.
If I've got eugenicists here.
If I've got the flu, I'm not going to go see Mama.
No, of course not.
I think.
Oh, for sure.
I think that's a lot of the thinking behind this.
Yeah, if you listen to Scott Atlas, who Trump tried to bring in to kind of counter Fauci. I mean, and people think he's crazy, but he said all of these things. He said, COVID is dangerous. We should isolate the most at-risk population, make vaccines an option, and have therapeutics, which have survived the total smear attempts against them.
When you said therapeutics, it made me think that this idea of civil war, I wonder if we're already seeing a trend of people moving away from some states and to some states because, they want the whole totally California booming to Texas thing. I mean, it's a growing trend. And I remember I had some family that got COVID in a state where they weren't able to get the whole monoclonal antibodies.
Monoclonal
is that what it's called?
Antibody treatment.
Yeah. Whereas here in Texas and in Florida, it was you get it. If you want it, you get it. And so I wonder if that might be the answer is maybe not civil war, but a sort of redistribution of people to states.
Maybe not civil war. Well, I will say, just as a small plug, one of the things I started doing because I don't have time to read nearly as much as I would like to is I subscribe to this. One of the newsletters I subscribe to is called The Flip Side. And it gives you headlines, and it has a team of writers from the left and writers from the right, and they look at all different publications. So they look at mainstream, and then they look at the crazy sides on both the right and the left, and then they get a bunch of different writers, and they have, and it's really good. It's really, so I read a lot of these things, and I'm like, yeah, you think you're unbiased, but I know, I can tell.
Yeah.
This is the first one I've read that I'm like, no, that's legit. And so what they do is they try to present the best arguments. Here's what the left's saying, here's what the right's saying on each topic. And then once a month or something, they have a special thing called Ask a Liberal or Ask a Conservative, where they It's fascinating. It's fascinating. So it's like a daily inbox thing. If you theflipside.com, I think.
Cool.
Is it a Substack?
That is cool.
I've got lots of Substacks
I
going.
don't know what
I
that
don't even
is.
know what that means.
I don't
Someone
know.
used
Sub-
that term recently.
Okay. It's a
Is that like a chat room?
It's a newsletter service.
Yes.
So people it's like a blog that
It's a live
goes to
journal.
your inbox.
Yes, it is. That is what it is.
Okay.
A vlog.
The flip
Okay,
side.
You subscribe and it comes to your inbox.
That's
yeah.
exactly what it is.
And by the way, Gmail hides them. They hid my Substacks. They put them in a new. It created a new folder on my email, my email app, my Apple email app. It created a new folder called Substack, and I'm like, where did that come from?
So
There's 300 emails in there.
It's so helpful. They know
helpful.
what
Thank
you
you,
want.
Google. They don't want me to read my right wing propaganda written by
Oh my gosh.
by left wing people like Alex Berenson, who used to write for the New York Times.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Sadly, I don't think we have time to get to reimagining marriage
That's
or
timeless.
how families can turn their kids into Christians or
The marriage
Yeah.
one is timeless. Bring that back next time.
I shall.
I told you the sorry thing was going to take too much time.
But wasn't it fascinating? It had to do with sex and cultural appropriation.
But they weren't sorries. They were what?
They were the hengas.
Lehengas. Now's the time to tell you if you've never watched an episode of Sex and the City.
I probably could have guessed that. Yeah.
Evan has.
And by the way, you
I have
are better
many.
for it.
Really?
Many.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Is it because your wife watches it, or are you like a closet?
My roommate in seminary may have owned all the DVDs.
Are you kidding me?
owned the DVD?
This is why you're like,
I'll-
actually,
yeah.
you know more about Sex and the City than I do. There you go,
I think-
Sex and the
I
City.
didn't watch any of the movies, but I'm pretty sure I saw all the episodes. And I did not understand the thing with Mr. Big at all. He was lame.
Well, don't worry, he's dead now.
Chris, I know. I'm glad.
Spoiler.
Is Chris?
I'm glad. Oh
is
my
Chris,
gosh,
is
Evan.
Chris not some heartthrob? I don't
Well,
get it.
no, he became that. Like, it's, you know what? Maybe another episode we'll talk about.
I'm going to
Okay.
Google this so I know what y'all are talking about.
It was the whole thing with Peloton.
Okay.
Yeah,
Where
don't
do
buy a
people find
Peloton.
Bradley Varnell.
Varnell.
Did I get it right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But you have to say it in a southern accent like he does.
Christchurch Cathedral.
Christchurch
downtown.
Cathedral downtown. We're good Episcopalians.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lovely place.
Yeah, we have 4
it's
different denominations represented today. That's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm at First Lutheran here, flhouston.org, and you're at.
Well, it's easier to just find me on Facebook.
Okay.
Sarah Garment Stone, like garments of righteousness.
How holy.
When I was little, I used to love Palm Sunday because they would talk about garments. It's my maiden name. What can I say? Anyway,
You were the biggest nerd.
I know.
I'm Meredith Mills. I'm at Westminster Methodist in the Galleria area.
And everything you need to know, you can find at HoustonTOT.com. Like about life, about love, finances,
Wow.
politics.
I'm
I'm joking.
going there today. Who writes for this? You know. Do they have a Substack?
They are we.
Okay.
Anyway.
Until next time, we encourage you to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.